Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. This is episode number 43, and today is October 21st, 2020. I'm coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo, Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at a loan program designed by New York State and offered to residential housing providers as well as small businesses and nonprofits. And then we're going to answer some questions from housing providers around the country. Before we jump into that, of course, we're going to plug our own social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can find those on our Facebook page over at facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also find the replays after each episode on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Own Buffalo. Don't forget that you can grab a free 30-minute consultation over at ownbuffalo.com as well. I do have a couple of time slots available for this week. Looks like 2 time slots for tomorrow, 2 time slots for Friday. And then we have some open time slots available for next week as well. Guys, take advantage of that while it's still available. We're not going to be running the free 30-minute consultations for too much longer. So definitely take advantage of that while you're still able to. Get in there before that actually becomes a paid product and you have to pay for that time. I love doing the little 30-minute consultations. They're a lot of fun. So definitely jump on that while you have the opportunity to grab it for free. Jump back to our social media. Don't forget to check out our Instagram page over at instagram.com/ownbuffalo. We're not quite as active over there as what we would like, but we're definitely going to start picking up on that in the near future. So be sure that you're following there as well. Last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. New episodes of that drop every Thursday morning, everywhere podcasts are heard. You can also grab those episodes along with show notes over at rentprep.com/podcast. So the new episode for this week will drop tomorrow. We're going to be looking at what to do when tenants renovate without permission, and it's extensively renovated. An email scam targeting rental payments, and an applicant making demands before they've even signed their lease. So pretty interesting episode tomorrow. Don't miss out. New episodes drop every Thursday morning, anywhere that podcasts can be heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. So before we jump too deep here, I want to switch back to desktop view here for a second. I wanted to share something that was sent to me by my office manager, just for a little bit of humor to lighten up the day before we get into our main topics of the day here. This comes to us from TikTok, obviously. If you're in the Buffalo market right now and you've been trying to get any projects done, you know that that's exactly how it feels trying to hire contractors. There's so many non-professional guys out there running around without insurance that are just trying to make a quick buck. A lot of them are doing low quality work and really harming people. So, you know, we talk all the time on here about making sure that the vendors that you're working with are high quality vendors, making sure that they have proper insurance and things like that. Let's just watch that one last time before we move on to our next part. I laughed so hard when she sent this over to me. I don't have a lot of use for TikTok, but every once in a while something really fun like that'll pop up. So that's our humor for the day to get us started. We're going to jump into our first topic of the day. Switch back over to desktop here. This is the New York Forward Loan Fund. And this is something I got an email about the other day. I wanted to make sure that I got this information out to as many people as possible. And essentially what this is a low interest loan program being offered to small businesses, nonprofits, and residential landlords, residential housing providers. I'm going to cover the residential housing provider portion. I'm also going to cover the small business portion. The nonprofit portion is actually pretty similar to the small business portion. And you can find all of this information over at connecttocapital.com/partners/New York Forward Loan Fund. Honestly, just open Google, type New York Forward Loan Fund. It'll pop right up. It's the first search result. That's how I came across it today. So before I jump into the loan terms, just a quick overview of this program. The program targets state small businesses with 20 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, which represents about 90% of all small business in the state, as well as nonprofits and small residential landlords that have seen a sharp reduction in rental income. These loans are available to small businesses and nonprofits that did not receive an SBA PPP program of greater than $50,000 or an EIDL loan of any amount outside of the initial up to $10,000 grant that everybody was being offered. This loan program is not forgivable in part or in whole. So, like your PPP program has a forgiveness option. These loans don't have that. You're going to have to pay these ones back, and the loans will need to be paid back over a 5-year term with interest. The other thing that I thought was interesting that's worth a mention here is that they broke out the funds based on geographic proportionality, which I think is interesting. I'm assuming that this was done by population, though I'm not entirely certain of that based on these numbers. Maybe it is by population the more I'm looking at it here, because you do see obviously the downstate area, Long Island and New York City, heavily favored. Western New York region gets 8%. I don't know how they have this broken out or what they use to come up with these percentages, but it's interesting that they are putting a lot more, almost 50% of the funding, 48% of the funding is going to, Long Island and New York City. It is what it is. It just leaves less for the rest of the state. So that's why I'm assuming that it's done proportionally, because you find that about half of the state's population is downstate versus half of the state's population upstate. Access to loans for residential landlords will be targeted to owners with residential buildings of 50 units or less. That's going to be the bulk of small landlords. And will prioritize loans for residential landlords whose properties are in a low or moderate income census tract or who serve low to moderate income tenants. I can tell you right now, we're going to jump over to the loan terms. The loan terms for the residential landlord are not quite as nice as what the loan terms are for small businesses and nonprofits. We'll get more into that here. For residential landlords, so we're talking about the loan amount now. It's the lesser of $100,000 or the projected reduction in 6 months of net operating income based on actual reductions in net operating income for the month of April or May 2020. A lot to unpack in that sentence. What they're talking about here is they're looking at April and May 2020, which I don't particularly like because those are the first 2 months of the pandemic, when people were still, for the most part, figuring it out. I think that this really should be expanded out now that we're into October of 2020. We're really starting to see the cracks are showing more and more as we get further and further into this thing. And it wouldn't surprise me if this program does get modified at some point to include more months now that we know that we're further into this entire situation. But it's based on net income. So if you have, tenants that are paying rent, say you have a 2-unit building and both of your tenants are paying rent and your expenses are about the same, this loan program probably isn't for you. And really it shouldn't be, because you're not impacted because you still have your rents coming in. If you have a 2-unit building and none of your tenants are paying rent and you still have all of your expenses, obviously your net income is going to drop substantially, which would make you eligible for this loan program based on that. But it has to be tied to that April or May 2020 net operating income. So that's something that you've got to keep in mind. The interest rate on these loans is going to be a fixed interest rate of 3%, which is fantastic. That's a great interest rate on an unsecured loan, which is what these are. For whatever reason, I didn't highlight the repayment options here, or the repayment information here. For months 1 through 12, so for the first year that you're paying on this loan, you're paying interest only. You can definitely pay more than that. There's no prepayment penalty. We'll get down to that in a minute. But for months 13 through 16, so basically years 2 through 5, you're going to pay, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to pay the interest and principal payments paid monthly. There's nothing that says that you couldn't redo your own amortization schedule and pay this thing off as though you were paying principal and interest from day one. As a matter of fact, that's probably what I would recommend doing for most people, just so that they don't get caught in some kind of a trap. And what can you use the loan for? You can use it for working capital, which is huge for a lot of landlords right now. Refitting for new social distancing guidelines, probably not as relevant unless it's an apartment building or something like that. Operating and emergency maintenance, property taxes, utilities, rent, supplies, etc. Refinancing of existing loans is not permitted. The loan applicant will be required to detail anticipated use of funds when they apply. There's no application fee. There is a late fee for missed payments, obviously. This is not a recourse loan. There's no collateral required for this loan. So this is essentially an unsecured 5-year loan being offered by New York State based on the impact that the pandemic has had on your rental business. So it's definitely something that's worth looking into if this is one of those situations where you can take advantage of it. Being that it is limited to just April and May's net operating income, you may find that this program does not work for you, but it's worth at least taking a look at to see if this might be an option, especially if you're a landlord that is struggling right now. There's also some more information as to the business requirements here for landlords. We're going to jump down. No more than 200 units under ownership, no single property greater than 50 units. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to meet that requirement. Properties must be located in a low or moderate income tract, low or moderate income census tract, or meet a rent test where the property rents are affordable to tenants of low and moderate income. Properties must have a positive cash flow for a 12-month period prior to New York forward loan request. Must have an active forbearance agreement for their mortgage or proof that they have not missed a monthly debt service payment in the past 12 months and or no mortgage. Must be current on property taxes. They will not evict COVID-impacted non-paying tenants. Of course, that's going to be the thing that they look at on something like this. If they're giving you money because your tenants have not been able to pay you because your tenants are impacted by COVID, the entire goal here is to keep people in their homes. They're not going to let you turn around, take this money, and then evict the non-paying COVID-impacted tenants. So that's something that you have to keep in mind that would put a restriction on your property as you're going through with this loan. Properties must be in good repair with no major life and safety violations. I would think that this one would be something that's more flexible, because if you're getting the money to complete an emergency repair, for instance, I would think that they would, understand that type of a situation. Must have suffered a direct economic hardship as a result of COVID-19 related to social distancing policies and stay-at-home orders that have materially impacted their operations. I don't know of any landlord who would be able to not meet that. Been in business for at least 1 year as of the date of the loan application. The properties must be located in the state of New York. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to jump back over and we'll talk about the small business side now. This is actually going to move a little bit quicker, mostly because it's largely the same. So the loan amount is going to be up to $100,000, 100% of average monthly revenues. I take that to mean gross revenues in a 3-month period prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. The 3-month period can be any 3-month period from 2019, all of 2019, or January, February, March 2020. So what this means to me is if you had a really good rolling 3 months in, say, March, April, and May of last year, those would be the revenue months that I would personally pick out if I was applying for this loan, because that's going to show the highest value for you to be able to get the largest loan amount that you're looking for. And they break it out with an example here, and they show you, what your loan amount, how it would factor out essentially. Essentially, just take your trailing 3 best months in all of 2019 and the first 3 months of 2020. Your best 3 months combined, that's going to be the loan amount that you're going to be potentially eligible for. And I believe that's based on gross. I don't see anything in here that indicates this is based on net revenues whatsoever. So for small businesses, the fixed annual interest rate will be 3%. For months 1 through 12, interest-only payments paid monthly. 13 through 60, interest and principal payments paid monthly. Same thing as on the landlord side. And again, the proceeds are basically for the same purposes: working capital, inventory, marketing, refitting for new social distancing guidelines, operating and emergency maintenance, property taxes, utilities, rent, supplies, etc. Again, this is a no collateral loan, no recourse here, and borrower may prepay the loan without penalty. So as I was talking about the repayment options, you could do the same thing here as on the landlord loan. Basically, if you wanted to re-amortize it yourself and make your interest and principal payments starting day 1, which would probably not be a bad idea, you could definitely do so. Business requirements for small business: 20 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, gross rev of less than $3 million per year, must not have received an SBA PPP program loan greater than $50,000 or an EIDL loan for any amount except for the EIDL advance up to $10,000. Same as the landlord side. must have suffered a direct economic hardship as a result of COVID-19 related social distancing policies and stay-at-home orders that have materially impacted their operations. Find me a small business owner that's not deeply impacted by COVID. Every small business owner I've talked to has had some sort of a COVID impact, whether it's not being able to get employees in, whether it's a reduction in overall revenue, whether it's not being able to get materials and supplies on a regular basis. You know, sometimes it's a combination of factors. It's, you know, owning a small business in New York State right now, or anywhere really, is definitely one of the more challenging aspects of life. And of course, your business must be located within New York State and be in business for at least 1 year as of the date of the loan application. So this is actually, you know, not a bad looking program for perhaps the small business owner. And a lot of residential landlords have a tendency to have small businesses as well outside of their real estate holdings. Not, you know, not everybody obviously, but a lot of people do tend to be more entrepreneurial and have a small business that is, you know, maybe it coincides with or works along with their rental property or something along those lines. Contractors are a great example. You'll have a contractor that owns a bunch of income property on the side. That's a good thing for them to do because obviously they can fix everything for the cost of materials. So it works out well for them. Let me see if there was anything else that I wanted to cover on that loan program before I jump into the next one. It looks pretty... Oh, with regards to credit, so there's the underwriting agencies are all going to be financial institutions, and they are going to be underwriting the credit aspect of it based on your credit and based on their underwriting guidelines. The state's not stipulating that there's, you know, if you have X credit score, then you have to be offered the loan or anything like that. That was not one of the things that was included in there, just so that you have a heads up on that. So that would probably be about the only thing. I'm just looking through the frequently asked questions here to see if there's anything that I may have missed. And I think I did a pretty solid job of covering this. So again, you can find that information over on connecttocapital.com/partners/New York Forward Loan Fund. And there's a dash between each one of those words. Honestly, just go to Google, type New York Forward Loan Fund. I'll pop it back up on desktop here so that you can get the text that you're looking for. And we'll leave that for just a couple of seconds. So definitely, you know, if you're in a position where you're looking to take advantage of an opportunity like this, you're looking for some operating capital to keep things moving forward while your tenants straighten out their situations, this might be the option for you as a housing provider. We're going to jump into our questions from housing providers around the country. We're going to start with this one here from, I believe all these were pulled from the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. And this first question is regarding a Section 8 screw-up. If you had a Section 8 tenant and the housing authority misplaced your HAP contract, what happens if you refuse to sign a new one? So a HAP contract is the contract between you and the Section 8 agency that basically says that they're responsible for paying X number of dollars and the tenant is responsible for paying Y number of dollars for a total rent of Z. Not having that contract is a big deal because they will eventually just stop paying you. I don't see any reason why you would want to not just sign another HAP contract. You know, I would be concerned that the Section 8 agency misplaced the original contract. Things do happen, but, you know, realistically speaking, without them having a HAP contract, they have nothing that says that they have to pay you. And that's pretty much the entire point behind the Section 8 program, is to have the agency paying you. So I would say just sign a new HAP contract and move on with your life. I would not make this a bigger deal than it has to be, because eventually they're just going to say, all right, your rent is now in abatement and you're never going to be eligible to get that money back, all because you wanted to play some games with paperwork. So I would probably just move on with that one, get it done, and keep moving forward. Umbrella insurance. I have a few single family homes in each LLC. Would you suggest I get a personal umbrella policy? So I'm definitely going to say this is a good idea. I'm going to recommend anybody who's listening, talk to their insurance agent. Like right now, today, talk to your insurance agent and make sure that your insurance policies actually cover what you expect them to cover, and see if you have any gaps in your coverage. And your insurance agent is going to be the best person to help you do this because they deal with this all day, every day. So I personally carry a personal liability umbrella, and it's very inexpensive. It's under $200 for the year. And it covers me, you know, above and beyond my auto insurance, above and beyond, trying to think of what else is, I think it's, you know, it's a nice policy to have. if my dog, for instance, was to bite someone, that would come back, and I could put that to my umbrella, my personal umbrella policy, stuff like that. It's a good thing to have. It's a very inexpensive insurance policy to keep yourself safe. It's also worth mentioning that I almost always take the overinsured rather than underinsured approach. And the reason I do that is because I'd rather be overinsured than underinsured at the end of the day. I understand that it comes with a cost, and I understand that in a lot of instances you may never tap that insurance policy. But man, the one time you do have to tap that insurance policy and it pays out in a big way, you're going to be so happy that you had that insurance policy and that you ponied up that little bit of extra cash every month to make sure that you were protected. So going into the actual properties themselves, every property needs to have a well-written property insurance policy, and it needs to be a landlord policy. It needs to be written such that the insurance company understands that this is a rental property, not a primary residence. And yes, you are going to pay a little bit more for that. And yes, you're probably going to pay a little bit more because your property's in an LLC as well. But having that protection is well worth it. Don't try to skirt around this just to save a couple of bucks. It's not worth it for you in the long run to skimp out on something like this. Above and beyond the individual property insurance policies, you may be able to get an umbrella policy for each LLC. You'll want to talk to your insurance broker and see what their thoughts are on that. A lot of times what will happen is if you have a claim against your property insurance policy, they'll try to push it out to the umbrella policy, keeping the rates lower on your property insurance, because that's obviously the more expensive insurance policy than the umbrella. I'm obviously not an insurance wizard here. Take everything I'm saying with a big grain of salt, margarita-size grains of salt. Throw them on the glass and be ready to go. But definitely talk to your insurance agent about this. This is not the type of situation that you want to find yourself, exposed in. Everybody has their own risk tolerance. Your insurance agent can help you to determine where you need to be on the spectrum and to go from there. Tenant not using apartment. This is actually an interesting one. I pulled this one because I thought it was incredibly intriguing. I'm curious as to what you would do. We have a 3-family building in Brooklyn, New York. One of the tenants left the city back in June and hasn't been back since. They are staying with their parents. They pay their rent every month despite not being in the apartment. Their lease was up in August and they signed a 6-month lease through the end of February. They wanted to go month to month. We agreed on a 6-month lease. I'm super glad to have paying tenants, and they are great tenants in general. I'm a little nervous about letting the apartment sit empty in case of leaks or other things that can go wrong. The other building tenants who are there are generally good about letting us know when anything is off. They alerted us to a broken window a few months ago. We are stopping by to check on things ourselves every few weeks. What would you do when it comes time to renew their lease in March if they haven't returned to the apartment? Would you renew, assuming they want to, and just keep on checking the apartment periodically, or would you not renew and chance finding a new tenant in these tenuous times? I'm pretty sure about what we are going to do, but I'm just curious as to what others would do in our shoes. This is not a bad situation for you to be in. At least in my opinion, this is not a bad situation for you to be in as a housing provider. The tenant might need that address for work reasons. If maybe they're a civil servant and they have to have an address that shows inside New York City limits so that they can keep their job or something like that, but they prefer to stay outside the city with their parents with everything going on because they may not want to be in a high population density area or something along those lines. So this isn't necessarily something that raises a ton of red flags to me. I know a lot of people who have either temporarily or permanently left larger cities during this pandemic because they just want the safety of not being in a highly compacted, a highly dense residential commercial area. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that this is happening. They may be waiting for an employer to decide on a full-time work from home policy. They might be in a situation, a lot of employers right now, we actually talked about last week, a lot of tech employers especially, are making policies for work from home that are either, long-term into the end of 2021 or permanent. And some companies are just a little bit behind the curve on that. So the tenant might be waiting for that to happen. They might just be waiting for clarification so they know if they need to keep their address in New York or if they're going to be able to work from wherever they want, type of a situation. That's kind of, those were the things that I was thinking of as possible reasons that this could be occurring. Your rent's getting paid, which is great. You're not incurring any wear and tear because the tenant's not living in the apartment, which is great. Realistically speaking, I think you're doing the right thing. The way to mitigate this risk is to regularly check on the apartment. I would say maybe once every couple of weeks you'll want to walk through and check everything to make sure that it's all up and running. A couple of other things I would do is turn off the valves on your toilet, under the sinks, and things like that. Maybe if you have a PIC line running to a refrigerator for an ice maker, you might want to shut that off as well. Flexible lines tend to be the first thing that fail. We had a situation in one of our buildings in University Heights where a group of college girls had gone home for, I think, spring break. And for whatever reason, like 2 days after they left for spring break, the nut that connected the flex line onto the bottom of the toilet was apparently over-tightened and cracked just a little bit, and it decided to let go. No one discovered that this property was flooding for 5 days. 5 days of water flooding into this property. So you can just imagine the loss that occurred. I mean, and it was a second floor bathroom and it was a finished basement. So you literally had 3 floors of destruction to work through. It was a pretty bad insurance claim. Pretty bad insurance claim on that one. Flex lines tend to be the thing that fail first. So I would say if you can shut off underneath of your sinks and under your toilet, PIC lines anywhere that there's a flexible line running to a device, shut those off to make sure that you are eliminating that risk at least. The other thing you can do is, at least here in New York where it's a cold weather climate, make sure that your thermostat is set to at least 55 degrees. That'll keep your furnace running. It'll keep the place warm enough that your pipe shouldn't be freezing. The other thing I always make sure to do is the cabinets that the pipes are running through, make sure that those cabinet doors are open so that the heat can get back to those pipes as well. That'll do a lot to help prevent freezing. That's what I would do. I mean, I would definitely not hesitate to renew this tenant. It sounds like it's a good option for you to continue to rent to this tenant. It sounds like the tenant is continuing to pay their rent. They're just trying to figure out what their situation is. You know, if they want to renew, I don't see an issue with this one. I would just make sure that you're doing those regular checks to make sure that you don't wind up with some sort of a bigger headache down the road. Last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about criminal history. I'm screening a middle-aged tenant whose criminal record came back with misdemeanor charges from 15 to 20 years ago, mostly driving under a suspended license and minor traffic violations, but they do have some more serious misdemeanors, including forgery, assault, and trespassing. I've met them, they seem solid, confirmed that they held a job for 12 years at the same place and they make 3 times the rent. I believe in people's ability to change and turn their life around. How do you guys handle screening in these situations? Should I ask them about it before making a decision, or should I just pass without giving a chance to explain? Thank you. So blanket no criminal history policies are pretty much a dinosaur in the property management industry. HUD has come out multiple times now and talked about disparate impact and how a blanket no criminal history policy creates a disparate impact for people. So you have to have a policy designed that looks at the crime, how long ago the crime was, you know, is this, you have to have a policy in place to handle these things, essentially. My recommendation is to look up a gentleman by the name of Harry Heist, Harryheist. I believe his website is evict.com. He's an attorney out of Florida and handles a lot of landlord-tenant cases, predominantly evictions, obviously, but he's incredibly knowledgeable in all things landlord-tenant law on a federal level and at a state level, at least for the state of Florida. My recommendation would be go and watch his videos on disparate impact and criminal history checks and things like that. You know, it's a really weird situation you find yourself in to try to develop a policy like this without creating an even bigger headache for yourself. I'm not going to get into what our policy and stuff like that is here. My recommendation would be to look at what Harry has up for debate, develop a policy, have your attorney review it. Your local real estate attorney should be reviewing any sort of a policy that you're putting in place, especially when it comes to something like criminal history, disparate impact, things of that nature. My biggest problem with the disparate impact policies that are being pushed by HUD is that housing providers aren't judges or attorneys, and we weren't on the jury of any case that's been heard, you know, when it comes to this tenant. So you're essentially asking us to make determinations based off of information that we have, very limited resources to verify. We weren't there. I don't love it. I really don't love it. In addition, you could be seeing a charge that was pled down for something much more severe to a minor charge, and you could be letting somebody with a much more serious criminal past in than you're even aware of, simply because you only see the, a possession charge for, a small amount, when it could have been, possession with an intent to distribute or something along those lines where they were carrying significant amount, whatever the case may be. Criminal history is a tough one. Definitely work on getting a policy in place. I can tell you that based on the information provided by this poster, this person would definitely pass through our criminal history check. The time from crime to now is extensive. We're talking about 15 to 20 years ago for the most part. It sounds like this person is, stable. They've got a nice stable job. They make 3 times the rent. It sounds like they've kind of done what they can to improve their situation and improve their life. This person would definitely make it through our criminal history check. So that's something to keep in mind. Get yourself a good policy in place and follow that same policy every single time. That pretty much wraps things up for us here today. Thank you all so much for watching. We really do appreciate it, and I love producing Ask a Property Manager. The best way that you can help us to improve is by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or YouTube, and your question may be answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if I brought some value to your day, please do me a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow more people and helps us to reach more people. So please take the time to do that. I would really appreciate it. Next week, we'll be back with an all-new episode on October 28th. That's next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.